to you from around the world. It's Learn Ubuntu Live, presented by learnubuntu.org, with your host, Tom Judge.
Welcome to the Green Room. This is the second to last chapter presentation for the Ubuntu Internet Fundamentals course. In this chapter, we're going to learn about cascading style sheets. This is a topic that probably deserves more than one chapter. We just wanted to get you started with cascading style sheets, and that is the purpose of this chapter. Among other things, we're going to show you how to use the div and CSS instead of the frames that we covered in the previous chapter. So let's move on with the presentation now and learn about cascading style sheets. Take your time with this chapter. It's long and involved. So here's our introduction to cascading style sheets. As you see, we illustrate this little toolbox here to make the point that this is only one of many tools you'll be learning as you progress through your web development career and learning more about it. You see PHP listed there, you see Perl, you see Java, JavaScript, and you can see CSS is just one of the many tools. So let's just concentrate on that one tool today. Here we show you a page without CSS applied, and here's one with CSS applied. And we're not trying to win any awards for creativity in the way these pages look. These are not meant to be examples as artistic or creative. They are illustrative. So some of the examples are pretty hard to miss and pretty blaring and not necessarily what you'd want to do on a website, but it's a way to learn CSS. There are several ways we can implement CSS in a web page. We can embed the sheets inside the document. We can link a style sheet to the document. We can import a style sheet document, and we can have only part of the HTML document respond to style sheet definitions, or we can also use inline style definitions where we put them in almost like an attribute in with the HTML tags themselves. Now, to understand cascading style sheets, we have to understand the elements of CSS. A selector is the first element we need to understand, and that is the way that we identify which part of the HTML page we're going to apply a style to. A selector can be all tags of a certain type, or it can be a tag with a specific name, or it can be a group of tags that match a certain criteria that makes them all part of the same class. So we're going to learn a little bit about what a class definition is as part of our CSS education. Below is an example of how some CSS identifiers may work. If you set it to H1, all H1 headings. H1.item, all H1 headings are of a class named .item. So we can make a selector which is a class. We precede it with a dot. H1 pound item, there we're using the ID. Now we're going to find as we get into JavaScript that the ID of an HTML element is very handy because we can then refer to that in JavaScript by the element's ID. So using the ID with CSS is very good because you can actually manipulate and change your CSS using JavaScript. Just .item, that's a class named .item. And pound.item is just a ID named .item. So you have a little bit of flexibility in the way we define our CSS. The idea is to relate the CSS to an element or a series of elements in the web page, and those CSS styles will be applied only to those elements as specified. Now, there is a hierarchy of CSS style sheets. In other words, how we make them. Most styles, you can make a group of styles separated by curly braces. Now, we're showing you some advanced code here. This is actually from our website. And here you see, if you can see this, we have an ID called vid3 container. We use that actually on our opening page. The video 3 container, I believe, is the container where the student orientation video plays. Okay? So, again, the point of this is, here's your CSS code, and here's where it's specified as where it's going to be used in the web page. In this case, it's an ID. If you look here, in this HTML code that we're showing along with this, we have it right here at the top. See? Div ID equals vid3 container. Therefore, that div will use all the cascading styled properties and values that we specify in our cascading style sheet. And each of these definitions in our CSS, notice we have an opening and a closing brace here when we're defining more than one item for a particular selector. And if you notice, all the property values are property, like here's width, and then colon, and then the value. Notice, if you look at this closely, you can see, here we have a width value specified 344 pics. Here we have a top value specified as a percentage. So the top of that container, the top of that will be 50% down from the top of the page. Again, this is advanced. We're going to walk before we run here. So, and again, we're showing you the close-up here of our property colon value pairs. And here's a division. This is actually from our web page where the introduction text is in the lower right-hand area of the page. Its ID is intro text div. Here's our opening curly brace. Here's our closing curly brace. And here's all of our property values laid out in line here. You can see we have text aligned is justified, top 70%, right 0%. We specify a font family. We're actually specifying 2 font families. The first choice would be Radana, the second sans serif. And we have a lab that shows you how to figure out if you're actually getting the right font or not. That's coming up. The font size, the width, the height. Okay, these are all property value pairs, which are all specified and contained within the curly braces of the selector. And this is the selector up here, pound intro text div. Now, there's some commonly used value pairs. There's a lot of value pairs. That's the bad news. The good news is there's maybe a dozen or so you're going to use regularly. And we outline some of those here. Background color, background dash color, color, font family, font size. Again, these should be lowercase. PowerPoint, Impress here. Impress tends to help me, and sometimes I don't catch it. It's helping time. These are all lowercase. Some more commonly used value pairs include width and height, margin, padding, border, text align, text decoration. And again, these are all specified in lowercase in the CSS. This is Impress being helpful and capitalizing my letters for me, and I didn't catch it. More commonly used value pairs is float. This is a very important one. This one we gave its own slide. It's so important. This is used with the div tag mainly to float a area of the screen to a certain XY coordinate. Float left, width 180, font size 10. These are all specifications for a right column. This is actually the right nav column on our website. This is how we lay that out. So, just to make sure we have the CSS syntax straight before we go too far with this, you notice we have our selectors, our curly braces, and then our property value pairs laid out within those curly braces. So these are the main elements of CSS. Again, the selector, the property, and the value. The selector governs what elements on the HTML page will be affected by this style, and then the property, the font, the width, the height, whatever, and then the value of that property, the size of the font, the width or the height of the cascading area that we're defining. Now, again, the methods of applying CSS inline, where you can include it within the HTML tag, sort of as an attribute embedded in the document heading or link. These are the three popular ones. I know we mentioned a few more in the beginning. These are the ones you're going to use, and these are the ones we're showing you here in this chapter. In our first lab exercise, we're applying one simple style. This is going to the H2, and this is an inline example. We're applying the style right within the HTML tag as if it is a attribute. And the same with this here. We apply a font style as well. And the lab exercise 1 results. We threw you a little curve here just to make sure you're paying attention. And this is a common mistake you'll make, so we like to show you the mistakes as well as how it works so you don't get frustrated with yourself when things don't work. In this example, initially we left off the closing quotes on our inline style. Therefore, it will not work. If you look at this, the page not only does it not work, the page doesn't complete loading. This is especially true of an inline style. If this were a linked cascading style sheet or something in the head, the page would probably continue loading, but you wouldn't see the style take effect. In this case, since we are doing this as an inlining style, we basically have caused an error in our HTML code, which caused the page not to load. So we go back and we correct it, and we notice, if you compare these two, there's no CSS style applied to this one, but after we've successfully applied the style, we now have italics in our list, and we have italics in our heading. We continue with CSS in lab exercise 2, but now instead of putting it inline, as you can see, inline is nice. In some ways you may need to use it, but if you make an error in the inline, if you make an error with an inline style, it can affect your page load. So here we're going to start showing you how to put it in the heading of the document. In the document head, we have a style tag, and here we're using an HTML comment for older browsers that may not support CSS, although that just, again, we used to do this a long time ago. It's probably not as necessary now. It's always good form to be cautious, so I'll leave it up to you. We're showing it to you here as the preferred way to do it. And here's our example where we are using the style for the heading. Notice I'm going to go back a slide to show you. Here's our style, H1 color blue. All we do is say anything that's an H1 tag will be in color blue. And here we see that has indeed happened in our lab 2 results. Now we could have specified a hexadecimal value as well for the color if we wanted to. Here we're going to add some comments in the styles, and this can be handy if you're making a big style sheet for a big website and you know you're not going to come back to it for a few months. It never hurts to leave yourself a note. It never hurts to leave a comment. And here we're showing the syntax for an HTML comment. It's a / asterisk and the asterisk / for one single line of comment. And here's our result of our second exercise. We added some CSS and also did a comment. We added some cascading style sheet for the paragraph, making the color red, which means the text to be red, the background aqua, and the text is indented. If you notice the first line of each paragraph, it's slightly indented here. Moving on with lab exercise 4, we're going to add with the selectors H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. We're going to add a font family, a font style of italic, and a font size of large. And here's our result with that. Now if you notice, go back here, all these are going to have the same size because we're overriding with this style size right there, see? So H2 and H3 are what we specified in our HTML. However, if you look at the example, the point is this is the same size as that. H2 should be larger than H3, which is larger than H4, which is larger than H6. However, since we added this style attribute here, we have overridden that. And they're all italic, they're all large. That's exercise 4. Exercise 5, we're going to show some styles in the document body. Here we're adding a body selector in our style, and some font families, and some background colors, and we also have another little curve we throw you here. Again, sometimes we make you make a boo-boo so you learn, because learning by mistakes is a powerful lesson, and no one's going to get hurt by this. Here we see the body background color has changed from our previous exercise to this one. However, we have to double check our fonts, and here's where we get into some extras of Lab Exercise 5. We're going to show you how to download a plugin for the Firefox browser that will check your CSS for you. Every developer should have this. There's many other plugins. We're just showing you this one for now. And in the details, we run you through how to install this extra plugin. And when you're done, the important thing is down here, we have a little button in our status area of the browser, and when we click that button that activates it, we click OK, and this little message that pops up for the first time in a session, you use it, and then when you mouse over a page, you'll notice the mouse turns into a crosshair, and click on an area where there's some text, and it will show you, the window pops up and shows you the CSS styles being applied. This is very handy for troubleshooting. Now, here's where we had you deliberately misspell the first font name so you can see what the problem is. Misspelling is the biggest problem in writing code. I do it all the time myself, and you will too, so we have to find ways to catch our mistakes. Now, notice here it says URV Rolenda L, something like that. ULV Palenda. It's supposed to be spelled with 2 L's. We can only spell the 1 L deliberately, because here's the point. Rendered. Font rendered is the second one, monospaced. Remember, these are on the list. We specify one font, comma, then another font, then another font, then another font. So one of those fonts are bound to load. That's our preference of fonts. Since the first one was misspelled, it couldn't be found, and therefore the second one was loaded. So continue with this. We go back in this lab and we correct our Palladio, URW, Palladio L, font spelling, and then we reload the page. Now you may notice, if you look at it closely, there's a subtle difference between this font and this font, and here again you have to put on your creative eyes, your artistic eyes, the closest to see it and see the difference. If you go back and check that, now since we have changed the spelling, we now it says font rendered URW Palladio L. Because it was spelled correctly, it was now rendered. And you can see, again, if you have to look real close, there's a subtle difference in these two fonts. Lab Exercise 6, we show you how to apply styles to lists, which is leading up to a more interesting Lab Exercise 7, I believe. Here we specify the list style to be square. This can help with some of that browser incompatibility stuff that we mentioned previously. And there's our example, our Lab 6 results. The bulleted lists are now set by the style selector property and value with little squares. Isn't that pretty? Now, let's talk about classes. Class is one of those computer terms that's thrown around a lot. And it can mean more than one thing depending on the syntax it's used, and that, unfortunately, leads to some confusion. Consider a class in its very generic, simple term for understanding now is a group. We're showing you a group of musicians here. This is the Symphonet class, and it consists of musicians, instruments, music, music stands, chairs. All that stuff is part of the class. But it's a group. And if it's an item that belongs in that group, then the item belongs to that class. So for now, for this chapter, consider class to be group. And if you're a member of that group, the styles we specified will apply to you. We have a reading on classes in this chapter. And the important part about understanding classes for CSS is it an independent class or it is a dependent class? If it's an independent class, the class is simply specified as .class name, and any element that you assign that class name will pick up that styles. If you create a class, however, with an element name as part of it, b.urgent, that class will only work with a bold tag. And that's our point. So if you create a class that's dependent, then that class will only work with that specific tag it's assigned to. If you create a class that's independent, then you can use that class with other types of tags by specifying it in the HTML section, and we'll show you how. And one of the problems with this, if you only look at the HTML, you'll not be able to see this difference, and we'll show you that coming up. Now, moving on, we're going to download 2 images in Lab Exercise 7 and put them in our public HTML/images folder to use in Lab Exercise 7. We're going to continue, and here's our cascading, our styles, CSS styles in the head of the document. And here we define fish 1 and fish 2, list style image colon URL, and then the URL to that element. Now, in this case, I have to say, it looks like this is not showing that fish bullet as being in the images folder, so that this, you may have to specify images for this to work. I just noticed that now. And here is our HTML, where we call that, in that list, class equals, specifies what class to use. And here's our results of 7, where we see the 2 little fishes as the bullets for those 2. And we continue with 8 to going in this vein of this comparing a dependent and independent class, just so we get a better understanding of this. Here we define 6 independent classes and 1 dependent class. The point of this exercise is this p no indent will only work with the paragraph class. However, if you look at the HTML, again, all I see is p class equals blue, red, no indent, underline. These will all work with the paragraph class, but this no indent one will only work with the paragraph class because it's defined as a dependent class. So this will only work rather with the paragraph tag because we defined it as a paragraph class. And here's our results of Lab Exercise 8. You can see the various changes to the document, and the colors and the shading and the fonts are always specified in those classes. Now we start on some interesting stuff. We mentioned this in the previous chapter on Legacy Frames, how we're going to show you something better here. And this is it. This is the div tag. I'm going to introduce some basic div and span tags and how we can use them along with the CSS as well as the block quote. Here we see a block quote in action where this is a block quote that's had CSS applied to it. We're going to see this in the lab. And Lab Exercise 9, here is your example replacement for using frames. Notice this is similar, although probably even a little better than our frame set example. This is what you'll end up with at the end of Lab Exercise 9. A web page, frames. I said frame, it's divs, but it looks like a frame set, doesn't it? So this is your replacement for the deprecated frames. And we go through that in detail, so Lab Exercise 9. Here is the basic HTML portion for that example. And here is the CSS, which you can see is more and more involved. And obviously you could take this CSS, we'll show you later in this chapter how to make that a separate CSS sheet, so you can use that frame set anywhere on any page you want and not have to put that in the heading of every page. Here's what you end up with, and we added this text in here to identify the different areas at the end of Lab Exercise 9. So there is your replacement for using frame sets, using cascading style sheets, and div, which is the preferred way to go, as of now. Some things in HTML are like bell bottoms. They come in and out of style. Lab Exercise 10, we introduced the block quote. Part 1 of Lab Exercise 10, here's our block quote without CSS applied. Here's the CSS we add for the block quote up here. Here's the HTML where we define it, class equals block quote, and here's our results. We can see that this is now a different looking page through the use of the block quote and the CSS styles. Lab exercise 11, we talk about links. You may have noticed when you click on a link and you've been there already, the link is a different color. See, this one's been previously visited here, and this one we have not been to yet. We also mentioned that as you're going through this, if you clear your history, those links will return to their original colors, and we show you how to do that as part of this lab, because you'll need to do that to be able to see what's going on. So we show you to use the refresh, we show you the link colors, and in this lab we show you how to change what those link colors are. And here's some CSS examples where we're using hexadecimal colors to specify the colors of the links. Now, we mentioned too, it's going to be read only when it's loading the page. If you have a fast connection, it may go by so fast you don't get to see that. Don't worry about it. The point of this is that we've changed, using styles, the colors of the unvisited versus loading, etc. link. And that's the point of that exercise. Now, again, we mentioned there were several ways to implement CSS, to embed it in the head, to link it to a style sheet, to import, or to use inline. Let's talk about the priorities. This is important. A link style sheet is applied to all documents that link to. If you have a linked page, and you also embed some styles in a page, those styles will override the styles from the linked page. If you then add some inline styles, those will override both the embedded and the linked page. So that's why we call them cascading styles, because you can have layers of priorities of how they're applied. And that can be very handy. Now you can override these. If you add the bang, I call it exclamation point to bang. If we add bang important to the end of a CSS specification, a property value pair, if we add important in the sheet, that will override any other one. So if you want to make a style sheet and link it to your documents and prevent anyone from overriding that style sheet that may be working on the project along with you, if you make that style important in the style sheet, it will not be overwritten by the embedded or the inline. Now in lab exercise 12, basically we're going to take all of the styles that we created in the heading of our examples up to this point. We're going to copy and paste that into a separate document, omitting the opening and closing style tag. And we're going to save that as a .css document, and then we're going to use this single line of code in the heading of our page that links that page to that style sheet document. And of course you must have the complete path correct for that. We'll link that to the document, and here is our results. And we wanted to show you the unlinked page. We basically copy all the stuff out of that page, then actually cut it out, save the page without the CSS in the head, make a separate CSS page, link it, and then we get this. Here is with, and here is without. So as you can see, linking CSS is a very good way to go. If you have a large website, you can link all the pages to one single style sheet or multiple style sheets. If you want to make a change to the website, you only have to change the style sheet, and that applies to all the pages on the website. A much easier way to go than individually changing each page. So, as the last reading of this chapter, we include a reference to CSS, styles and properties for you. It's not an exhaustive reference. We also have these two links we included for other places where you can get more information on CSS. We're not the be-all, end-all here. And as you can see, Cascading Style Sheets is where we start to really get to make good-looking web pages and really take control of things. So in the last chapter coming up, we're going to talk about the final project for this course. At this point, you have learned all the material for the course and ready to do our final project, which is coming up next. As you can see, Cascading Style Sheets is a very useful and powerful tool in HTML. This is the last of our learning chapters. The remaining chapter is instructions for your final project and the final exam for this course, and we wish you luck with that. You may be starting to think about what you're going to do next and what you want to learn next. We'll have a course currently in production and will be released soon on JavaScript, which is a good next step in learning how to develop web pages. It will give you some basic programming concepts and also stuff that you can use right away in a website development. We'll also be following that up with some LAMP developer courses, which will include PHP and Perl and MySQL to get databases linked to your website. So there's quite a bit to learn. We're hoping you got a good foundation from this series, and now you can proceed with the final chapter, which will instruct you on creating your project, your final project for the course, and then you can review as much as you want and take the final exam.
Portions of this program were pre-recorded.